Hey guys, Languagehacker here, and I'm going over my week 2 decks that I brought to GM this week. The format was still Conquest, so we still bring 4 decks, choose a band, and then we have to win a best of 5. This week had been has been kind of difficult to come up with a lineup for, specifically because the nerfs came out earlier this week, and we actually only had something like, I don't know, 10, 12, 13, 14 hours to test on the new patch. Most of this week's decks were kind of just theory crafted because we didn't have that much testing time. We just had to guess what would be playable post-patch and then test a little bit and confirm that it's playable or not, and then go from there. Unfortunately, that's still not enough time to actually be confident in brings, but this was a bit of a riskier week if you wanted to bring something a little off the wall instead of safe. I ended up bringing arguably something a little off the wall because the meta, in my eyes, would have slowed down a little bit because of the nerfs. I ended up bringing a much slower lineup than most other people did in Grandmasters across all 3 regions. Actually, not the slowest, but still quite slow. I ended up bringing Cthulhu Priest. This is pretty much 30 cards from Monsanto that he brought week 1. I was pretty happy with all of this. I didn't think I needed Yogg. The minion package is just Alusha, Zyrella, Samuro, and testing these, Malagos. These 4 felt really good. Having Blade Master and Zyrella with the 2 insights, generally when you most board-centric matchups, because you fall a little bit behind, you come back with a big heal with Zyrella, Desperate Prayer, Renew Stuff, or the Samuro Apotheosis. So the package here seems very good against board-centric decks, and you still have value cards against some of the slower matchups, Draconic Studies, Cthulhu, etc. That felt pretty solid. I didn't think it was worth changing much, and I think this was good against most of the decks that people would bring this week, regardless of what they bring, except for perhaps if someone brought Warlock. OTKDH I thought would actually be pretty good this week as well. In the case that people bring tempo-centric decks, this does very well. There's a lot of healing, there's a lot of cycle, you get to the combo pretty quickly, and there's not a lot of disruption in the meta, outside of particularly Warlock. But even against Warlock, the disruption happens way too slow for this. So I was pretty happy bringing this as well. It's just flexible. It didn't require too much testing because people have already been playing it, and the nerfs didn't really affect this. In fact, the nerfs hit decks that OTKDH was weak to, so in theory, OTKDH would have gotten stronger. And I actually didn't drop a single game this week with OTKDH. And my Priest was banned every match, just as a heads up as well. Oh, I guess I should also mention I finished top 12. I had a very difficult group for my lineup, so I didn't make it that far, but I was still pretty happy with my play. And my deck choices ended up being a little greedy, but I don't think I'm upset about that because I hit a really unlucky group. I think I was okay in a lot of other groups if I had hit people with different lineups, but my specific 3-person group was a nightmare for my lineup. And I still almost was able to get through, but I just couldn't quite get through the second match to get onto the top 8. Anyways, third deck, almost the same deck as last week from Lunacy, the Lunacy Mage. The Lunacy Mage was still honestly pretty okay. I tested a little bit of this, not too much. The deck really didn't lose anything, right? Lunacy got nerfed to 4 mana, which is still a big hit. One of the ways you could just blow out games is coin Lunacy on 2, or just Lunacy on 2 if you're on the play, but the rest of the deck still operates pretty nicely as a slow burny type deck, and I was still pretty happy bringing it this week. You still have some Lunacy payoffs with the Flamestrike Mask of Cthulhu, and you'll notice the difference between this deck and last week's Lunacy Mage that I brought is that I opted for a 4th 7-mana spell and a Ring Toss at the expense of the 2 berries I brought last week. And same thing, I expected the meta to get a little bit slower. I expected to see Priest and some Warlocks. Again, didn't happen in my group, but I think against those decks, this still performs quite well, and adding some extra top end for that could definitely help. Mage also went undefeated this week. I didn't drop a game with Mage, I believe. And then Warlock was my worst performing deck, but I think would have been really good against the expected meta that I thought. Again, for slower, more unrefined tempo decks, this should still be pretty good. Against Priest, this is very good, and the Mirror, it's just the Mirror. So I expected this to do pretty well. It did not. I think it went 1-8, but again, both my opponents basically had a target Warlock lineup. which is, I don't know if that's risky or not. The meta gets shaken up quite a lot around nerfs, so it's very difficult to tell which way it's going, especially when we don't have time to prepare, time to actually practice post nerfs with the changes in the client. So I didn't expect too many anti-Warlock decks, and even against the anti-Warlock decks, there was a consideration to bring a very anti-aggro shell, which means cut Cascading Disasters, cut Yasharaj, the Strongman, put in Death's Head Cultist, put in Kazakus, and just some more early game tools. But I ended up not doing that because I thought it was a little too risky to go for an anti-Warlock strategy. Nothing too fancy here, honestly. I have the Ogremancers in case, and the Vol'jin in case some people decide to bring Libram Paladin, which ended up being way too slow to bring, but just in case. It's still okay as a tempo tool against some decks that are aggressive enough against you, against Secret Paladin. If you just proc their secrets and then just play a Vol'jin to bounce something back in hand, that can be pretty good. Generally, they play most of their minions early, so when you Vol'jin any sized minion, it either pulls out another small minion or just saps it because they don't have any other minions left in hand by the end of the game. The Vol'jin ended up being pretty nice. It's also a slight nod to Demon Hunter. I expected OTKDH to pop a little bit too, and even though that matchup is awful, I didn't think I wanted to ban OTKDH most of the time, depending on the lineup. So I wanted to bring Vol'jin as an extra out in case I needed to magically win that matchup. Otherwise, this is fairly standard, nothing too crazy. But yeah. Didn't quite hit the mark this week. I mean, you can't even say I didn't quite hit the mark. I think my lineup was actually okay into the field. It just was very, very bad against my particular group. But I think I played very well. I'm happy with my play. I'm happy with my prep. I ended up actually, after submitting decks, I practiced playing this literally hundreds of games against my opponent's decks to gain edges because I knew it would be the hardest deck to get through. Like I said, this got banned every game, and these two did not drop a single game. Warlock was the only one that had trouble. So practicing this, I think, did help my percentages a lot, but we got really, really unlucky with the Q order, and we got unlucky with a coin and our draw. Honestly, this week was an absolute disaster in terms of RNG. Both in the group we were the group we were placed in, the matchups we hit within the matchup, within the games, like Warlock versus whatever. Ideally, I want Warlock to get through Paladin if possible, but also. Something I noted on Twitter, in practice, I noticed that when you're on coin against Druid and off coin against Paladin, your 1% goes up like 10 to 15%, which is substantial. And in all 9 games of Warlock in the Cup, not the Cup, in Grandmasters this week, I lost every single on coin flip. So if I needed to be on coin, I was off coin, and if I needed to be off coin, I was on coin every single game. But anyways, I can complain about RNG all day. I was still pretty happy with the lineup. Ended up being a little too slow for my group. We'll see how the meta develops for next week. Yeah, comment, like, subscribe. Let me know what you think about my decks. Don't tell me they're poop. I already know that they perform poorly. But yeah, see you guys next week.